In my mind, I already had this idea. I wanted to do something very, very different because Underground was finishing the cycle that started in 2014 with Moonlight to Bill Street to Underground. All the things just ran into one another, and the script came, and it all started with the script. To be honest, I read it thinking I would read 10 pages to be courteous to my reps, and then tell them that this was not going to happen. And the scene where Taka and Mufasa run off their families behind because the outsiders are coming. I got to that scene and realized I thought there was something really special in the story. You know, you don't grow up being the person who directs a movie like Moonlight. You grow up watching Coming to America and The Lion King and Terminator 2. And so this tapped into those things for me. And I remember, because we were making the, James was here last night, James is not here. You're gonna be James Laxon. Whenever I think of James, I gotta turn this way. Because the Underground Railroad happened in 2019, I'd never even heard of the remake of The Lion King. So I went and watched it, and I thought the technology was fascinating and just very different than anything I'd ever dealt with. And so the combination of those things, I thought, yeah, there's something to chase here. Let's see what we can do.
So in terms of technology, Adam and Dan, you've both worked on that 2019 Lion King. What kind of initial conversations do you have with a director like Barry when they come on and you need to kind of explain to them what is in store for them and how you need to work together?
I got asked to write a little pitch doc about what I might do differently this time, and I think that just got sent to you and others too. And then and it was about sort of process stuff, you know, like how you might do it and be a little more clever about this and that. But one of the notes in there I remember saying is, if the filmmakers really work together and take every step to heart, you know, you can really make a draft of the film in that first phase of this virtual production phase where so people who might not know what that is, it's in an animated film, you know, this is a big question, is this real, is it animated, whatever, it's all animated. This is the guy whose team animates everything. So in that process, you go from storyboards to some form of layout, you know, which means like where the camera is, where the action is, and you block the scenes. And in the virtual version of that, we're trying to give live action people a chance at using their instincts and their skills. Because if they're trying to explain it with words, I think the shot should be more like this. It's a harder road. So you're saying, why don't you grab something, we'll track the movement of it, that's the camera, shoot it. Or block it, stage it. And so I think that was the focus of the first conversations, was lessons of the past and how we might do that stuff better. And then after we had a first meeting, I got a phone call, you know, would you want to do this one? There was another one I was connected to. They said, would you want to do it? I said, yep. Is Barry Jenkins, he's doing it? It's going to happen? Yep, I'll do that one. We made that choice. And so the initial conversations were all about how we might build a bridge for this guy.
I like bridges. If they get you from here to there safely, warmly, you got a little knapsack with you, a little lunch, you know what I'm saying? Appreciate you, man.
And how about you, Daniel? What were your first conversations like with Barry or whoever when you initially came on?
Yeah, well, we were pretty in the middle of the pandemic, you know, and sort of like, the first thing that comes to mind is that trying to get the ball rolling, you know, with this. So that you get storyboards out there, you have conversations with Barry, and you realize that storyboard is like the first little glimpse of something. You know that there's going to be direction to come, and like this sort of organic flow that's going to happen. And so I remember us doing these quad views, literally, you know, had just filmed multiple different angles of this animation that we're creating, and it was so strange with all in our own little boxes on the Zoom channels as well, like talking about that stuff. So it was really, really tricky. And I remember when the first moment we actually got onto the stage, and I think one of the first conversations I had with you was actually saying, so do lions really move their legs like this when they walk? And so that was like a moment, like, wow, we're actually talking with each other when we're here. And I'm I get up and run around and try to sort of express my body and my face a lot when I'm trying to do this. So when I could be in front of Barry, that was when I realised that, like, we could actually, push this thing forward, get this thing started.
I'm curious to hear a little bit about the casting process, because obviously I think of your movies as so actor-driven. How's the casting process different for a movie like this? What were you looking for?
It was actually more direct, I think, in this case, because typically, unfortunately, the way a person looks oftentimes is a very big part or a large part of their being cast. And I love the idea that there are really gorgeous people, and that doesn't matter at all in this process. It's like in baseball terms, a 5-tool player can only use one tool, and that tool is their voice. And so it was really cool because the movie starts out with just radio play, and we directed the entire film twice actually with a temp acting troupe as we were casting. We did the entire film so we can get the storyboard artists going, and then we went back once we had done the principal cast and re-recorded the film. So I was just listening to the quality in people's voices because those radio plays are what had to drive the emotion for the entire process of the film. Everyone who touches the movie, from the storyboard artists to like the VCAM animators to the post animators, they are going to be driven by the emotion in those voices. So I was kind of just like closing my eyes and just listening to who sounds like this character. And I think, and then once we did have the cast, it was really fun to get to really explore, because in animation you can become very constrained by the tools, but when you're just dealing with people in a booth, sounding out these emotions, you can create anything.
I was also curious, one of the things I loved about this movie was just the different environments. I mean, there's so many great, locations, and I'm curious, like, in terms of figuring those out, do you go on a location scout to Africa to look at like real places that you're going to model this on, or how do you?
We would have, but Mr. or Mrs. with gender-neutral COVID-19, we want to name them, had other plans, so we couldn't physically go. But this really wonderful thing happened because, Mufasa gets washed away from his land, and he has to go on this journey to get back to Malele, which is sort of like the Pride Lands we met in 1994, which is roughly this localized region near Kenya. And so we actually mapped out where he would have gotten washed to and where he would be journeying through. And rather than us going there and doing a 6-day safari, and you're like, oh, that thing looks cool, and then you take a picture, we reached out, and this was during the pandemic, so people were like locked down, to all these people in these places that we had literally mapped out, these artists, conservationists, and said, what is the most interesting thing about your landscape, your environment that you would like to see in a film? And they would send us photos, videos. We stayed constantly in contact. And Mark Friedberg, who was the production designer on Underground Railroad and of No Street Could Talk, he built all those environments in the sort of virtual VCAM space that these guys inhabit. So it was really, really dope.
So I'm curious to hear a little bit about this. Like, how does that production design system work? Like when Friedberg is building these environments, what exactly are we talking about here?
I can try to represent it. So we use this Unreal Engine as a game-making tool set, right? And so everybody's seen video games, they kind of get what that is. So what you're doing is you're building a thing that's kind of like a video game space, and then you're using that kind of software, which means when you put VR goggles on, that software is ready to draw it in real time for you. So the video game you're playing is walking around a synthetic part of Africa. That's kind of what's happening. That's kind of what you're doing. And because we can do it together, you can be like, Barry, come over, look at this. Maybe this is where this happens, or maybe this could be where we set this scene if we put some more trees here, or Barry might say, none of this is working, just like a scout. This isn't it. And then you find something else. So you're basically taking references of real places, mocking up something in a kind of a rough form, and then you're exploring it. And then the video game tech is the thing that makes that real time, makes it interactive.
And so, Barry, you were telling me outside that it took a while for you to get comfortable with this technology, or for the technology to catch up with what you wanted to do in terms of your approach to filmmaking. So talk a little bit, like, what was that first year like on this movie before you felt like you really had it where you wanted it?
Yeah, the first year was a little frustrating, if I'm being honest, just because the way James Laxton, the cinematographer, and I, we kind of evolved from Moonlight to Bill Street to Underground Railroad to this camera that's almost, it's like omniscient. It's like an active participant in the frame. The characters are moving or they're feeling, and so the camera is moving and feeling in concert with that. But that's something where you're capturing an image, not controlling it or creating it. And in this world, you create everything, like every single thing. And then you go, oh, intellectually, where does the camera want to be? What would it react to? And so it's not that same sort of relationship. And so I found it to be frustrating. And these guys recognized that frustration and began to evolve the technology that we were using so we could bring a more live action principle to the virtual production.
So how did the technology evolve since the first Lion King in a way that you were able to kind of adapt it better to Barry's filmmaking approach?
Yeah, well, talking to that, like, it's kind of funny. There's in the first film, like, we basically move the characters around almost like chess pieces. You know, everything's done on a very basic level, and then you just iterate. And the problem is you don't get the performative interaction like straight away. So using sort of motion capture techniques in this film, which we didn't do in Mufasa, we didn't do in Lion King, meant that we had the ability to have these human actors acting in a certain way, or like, it was literally me in a suit, and a few others performing. So like you could step forward, and that could imply that someone was nervous or something like that, and then James and Barry could react to that. It's quite interesting because, especially at the start of production, when we weren't doing this, we were kind of doing it in that basic way. And like, to put it in a kind of funny way, is that imagine being in a studio and you invite someone in just to look at your pretty picture that you've drawn right here, but then the director goes, well, "What's this happening over here?" In the corner of the room.
Which the director often says.
Yeah, and that was alarming, but then actually it really kicked us along to say, how can we give a world to Barry, not just one little window, and that's why and how we ended up developing it.
And so, what do you feel that gave you, Barry? I mean, once that was all.
Oh, I mean, it's like, it was crazy. It just opened up everything. There's a scene, you guys just saw the film, where Rafiki is fishing and Mufasa wakes up from his nightmare and approaches him. That scene, because whenever we're doing these things on the stage that Valdez is talking about with being able to react, we're playing the voices of the principal cast, fully edited as a scene out loud on the stage. So I've directed the voices, and now I'm directing just the physical movement, the physical blocking of the scene with animators in suits. That scene, it was meant to be that Mufasa walks up, and it's really simple. They have a conversation face to face. But we could hear that there was something in Aaron's voice in the performance that, I don't think he would actually say that to his face. He needs to have this sort of the space, this isolation, to be able to really fully commit to admitting that he has these memories of his mother, that he's feeling these very internal things. So we got to, you can't do this in animation typically, we got to remix it. It was like, Fathers, actually, I think at that point you should move around. And I said to the young woman playing Rafiki, I think it was Molly that day, and don't turn to him. Let him go behind. You're giving him the space to sort of go out there and sit on the therapist's couch with his back to you, your back to him. And two things happen. One, the camera then is now sort of drifting around, and when Mufasa's head drops and he looks at the reflection of the camera, just really interactive things that, as opposed to me iteratively telling the animator, what would have been cool at that moment? Then it goes back 3 weeks later or 3 months later, it comes back. We just do it right there in real time. And the other thing that happens, I think, for you fathers, is that you hear me picking out these emotions I'm hearing in the performance, and now you're going to go back and start coding those into the expressions that you guys are building. So it just opened up everything.
Yeah, it's like the best launch ever. We did. I know exactly the scene we're talking about. It was 9 takes in 28 minutes. And
it was 9 takes in 28 minutes. This is amazing.
And we would spend literally a month doing that, and we would have done something. That would have been the first take, maybe. Of that moment. So yeah. Good.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing I loved about the movie is, being a fan of yours, Barry, and kind of knowing your style, I did feel like there were a lot of nice subtle Barry Jenkins touches throughout this movie. Like I feel like there's slightly longer takes in some ways than you'd see in a typical movie like this. There's some slightly more elaborately choreographed long takes, things like that. And I'm curious, you've talked about James and you've talked about the production designer. How does a movie like this change the way you work with your editor? Because I know you're working with an editor here that you've worked on, I think, all your other movies with, or most of them.
It doesn't change. If anything, I mean, she's working in overdrive. I mean, she had to cut the movie so many times. Every time when the temp cast came in, she cut the film. When the principal cast came in, she cut the film. Storyboard, she cut the film. VCAM, the production dailies that we get from the squad cap, she cuts the film. Then it goes off. She's sending off locked scenes all the time. Then it goes off, it goes to post-animation. It comes back, she cuts the film. Cut the film. So it was like her office. Actually, when we started, I had the big office, and I realized, no, you take the big office. I'm gonna go a few doors down, because she needed that space. It didn't change at all. If anything, I had to really lean on her more than I typically would, because all the information, directing a film like this, it's like there's a sandwich, and you direct the bread. And then you go over here and you direct the deli meats, or the deli veggies if you're vegetarian. You direct the cheese, you direct the condiments. You direct them all separately, and somehow you have to always be aware that they have to come back together, and what are they all going to taste like when combined? The editor is the person who, every single time you bake one of those elements, she is managing, okay, how is this going to slot in, how are we tracking it? I mean, it was extraordinary what she did.
Well, it kind of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of this about the scale of the movie. Like, I think about, you guys are in charge of hundreds, probably thousands, I guess, of people, their fingers are in this movie. And how do you kind of maintain control without letting the movie get away from you? I mean, I'm curious about this from all of you. Like, how do you sort of keep your grip on it?
I mean, I'm trying to not have control, just because these guys are so talented at what they do. I used to love finishing the scene to a certain degree, sending it off, and it's almost like I describe this process somewhat like learning how to make films. Again, because when I first learned to make films, we shot everything on 16 millimeter, and in that world, especially back then in the late 90s, you go on set, you film the image, you can't see immediately on tap monitor what it looks like. You send notes, it goes off to the lab, it comes back, you have an idea, a projection of what it's going to be, but you don't truly know until you get the print back. This is kind of the same way as you advance through the processes, so I didn't want to have total control. I loved sometimes getting the scene together in Quad-Cap, being like, yo, that's dope, and then it goes off, and then the first pass comes back from post-anim, and it's like, oh, that's a little not what I expected,
Could be good, could be bad.
Could be good, could be bad. What'd you guys do here? And then we get to talk. So I think just communicating throughout the process across all these different people was the most important thing. But controlling them, I'm always trying to relinquish control and just capture whatever is in front of me.
How about you guys?
That's right. Let's not control. Let's capture.
How about you guys? I mean, again, like you look at the credits for this movie, and there are hundreds of visual effects people, hundreds of animators. I guess I don't know if it's control is the right word, but how do you kind of maintain consistency across all that?
You got about 150 animators that worked on this film over the period of time, and they are the most sensitive, beautiful people on the planet. Not biased at all. But they really are great, and they are going to come up with so many different ideas. And Barry's just so great that he actually gives us that sort of basically freedom, but also he's asking for something back. So what I call it the paddock. It sounds funny, but you basically have an entry, you have an exit for a performance, and if you just provide them with a road or a bullseye, you're just never going to get something back that's amazing, And so, if you provide them a paddock, which you give them some guidance in, that always is amazing. We have 150 animators. One person's going to come up with something amazing. The best thing about it is that you can take that forward. So we had multiple animators on the team that we just pointed out. Wow, that piece was amazing. That piece was amazing, and they became the hearts of the characters. As we move forward.
And then you've got another several hundred or whatever it is, 800 more or something as well, doing environment building, how the fur moves, the lighting, the rendering, the compositing, the effects, like all these other teams that are working off, waiting for that animation to finish and for Joy to recut, and that's our scene. And we're trying to establish looks with Barry and with James often for each sequence. And what's fascinating to watch is effectively by the end of the movie, because remember we had, you know, some like little additions and changes at the end, and those things can fly through at the end because it's taken a while, but that, say, 800 people now know every rule of this movie. They know how the eyebrows should move, they know what the colors they can use are per sequence, they know what the rule is for how much snow they can put, they know how the 3D should work. And they've had to, I mean, this process is about, there's one filmmaker's voice that we're all trying to click into, and there's a lot of getting it wrong until they learn it, and then once they all learn it, they're the experts. So that letting go is actually kind of echoing down through the team. You know, you're briefing, like you said, you brief, and we always say you get one chance, right, as an artist. If you're gonna be an animator or a lighter, or you're gonna lay out a set, well, you get the brief, and then you're gonna come back with your first draft. It's probably the same when you're writing anything, right? Any of these crafts, it's like your first go, it either works or you're gonna get notes. And so it's wonderful when the artist, the individual animator, the individual lighter, comes back in their first draft as a supervisor, you see it and you go, yeah, I'm showing that to Barry. That's great, let's show it, let's see how it goes, you know? And then he'll tell us if it's right. But, you know, so it's a fascinating thing. Yeah, all these people, if he's letting go, we're letting go a little bit. And then once you know what works, now there's a little bit of control. There's hundreds of people that you need to say, okay, this is how it works. This is what we're doing. And then you just try to get things finished.
Another thing I thought was really cool about the movie is it's a great action movie. Like, you know, this is cool to see Barry Jenkins making an action movie. And, you know, normally I think of you and your influences, and I'm thinking of, like, you know, Claire Denis or Wong Kar-wai or Steven Soderbergh, you know, some of these kind of, like, what were some of your influences or reference points in terms of, like, becoming an action director for this?
John McTiernan, Rennie Harlan, Tony Scott. I think that might cover it. Yeah. I mean, I would be like, yeah, you remember, man, in Die Hard with a Vengeance when you ripped out the power steering and did the thing? Or the Long Kiss Goodnight was one that we is it Long Kiss Goodnight or Goodbye? Goodnight, right? Yeah, that was one that we referenced quite a bit. I don't know, but we also try to have the action still be motivated by character, to have the camera behave the same way. You know, this almost like omniscient present, the energy is sort of driven by that. And so we tried to have, even within these action set pieces, really extended cameras. You know, I love during the last fight between Kyros and Mufasa, when he jumps out of the little waterfall, they start tumbling, and it's one shot, and it's just like 360 around a little bit, and then we zoom out a little bit, and it's a really great showcase for these guys, but also it's the way, it's like time slows for Mufasa, so time should slow for the audience. And I do feel like in the late 80s, mid 90s, those directors, they were just, I don't know, they were just staging and choreographing action in such an elegant way. And it wasn't just like cut, 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 cut. It was like frame, block, move, set. Frame, block, move, set. That's what we try to do in the action set pieces. And the camera can be anywhere in a movie like this, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. For you guys, what were the most challenging of the action set pieces?
The fun. Yeah, the fun was really, really tricky. We spent months doing that, and like multiple iterations of us in VR trying to work out what was happening in that moment. You know, like it's a really delicate piece. You know, trying to see a young cub sort of get torn away from their parents. So yeah, so it was a tricky one. You know, animation can get really violent really easily, really scary really easily. So yeah, it's quite delicate, you know, and tricky.
And Barry's got this thing about wanting the audience to be on the roller coaster, feeling it.
It's not standing on the fairground looking up at the roller coaster.
Yeah.
You got to be on it.
So I think when you have the chase or the flood, or many of them, and that camera is with character, connected, then the audience gets to enjoy the action too. And so one of the cameras I love is just when they're in the race, when the two cubs set out, and you're just chasing them, and the camera's like just dropping through the grass. You almost feel like you're like hit in the face with the grass. And then you do get a cut, and Mufasa's going,
And you see Mufasa in 4DX.
And these are great little moments in there, where I just feel like these filmmakers were finding it, figuring it out, trying not to break that, and just deliver something exciting, from a POV that's like this far off the ground, basically, which is pretty fun.
Yeah, Daniel's point about the violence raises another question for me, Barry, which is how tricky was it to sort of calibrate the tone for this movie, where you're making a movie for kids, but also that's supposed to appeal to adults, and like just in terms of figuring out like how far you can push it, how scary you can make it.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you think of that 1994 film, it's got one of the most honest depictions of grief, of trauma in any film, whether you're at the Cannes Film Festival, Sundance, or an AMC multiplex. When Simba walks up to Mufasa's dead body, that's really intense, and it's extensive. It's like a 10-minute sequence. I think because of that, the honesty of that, I didn't feel like there was anything that we needed to shy away from because the model was already set. Now, because this is photorealistic in a certain way, there is a point where you tip over into something that's too graphic. And so that was always a negotiation that we had to sort of work from. We're standing in the legacy of this thing that has just one of the most jarring depictions. The first time children are having to consider this very complex emotion of what it might be like to lose a parent. And it's not a blip, it is an extended beat. But because it's so honest and pure, the movie has endured, the story has endured for 30 years. And so we get to approach some of that, but because of the look of the film, we still have to be mindful of, showing versus telling, or in this case, sometimes telling versus showing.
And then in addition to being an action movie, it's also a musical. Talk a little bit about working with Lin-Manuel Miranda on the songs.
It was cool, man. Typically in a musical, the songs come first and the movie wraps around it, but because of the timing of us making this film, we just began making the film. Lin was finishing Tick Tick Boom and Encanto, and so he had to come on sort of like midstream, but a really lovely thing happened because of that. The songs rose organically out of the film rather than vice versa. So when Taka's running and he looks over and he says, "I have one more secret, Mufasa, I always wanted a brother," that wasn't the name of the song in the script. Lin watched a cut of the movie and was like, "That's the song. I always wanted a brother." He just started humming it. And so things like that kept happening. So it was really cool. I never made a musical, so I didn't know anything about making a damn musical. It's like, "Lin, what do we do?" He's like, "Songs." Just kept happening over and over again. And then it was just about visually, Fantasia is one of my favorite Disney movies, but again, with this style of animation, how do you get to this sort of magical realist version of Disney? It's like, oh, well, if lions are singing, then dandelions can become butterflies, And it really starts to free you and open you up. So yeah, the songs are really cool to work on.
Yeah, well, it's a really beautiful movie, and I appreciate you all coming out and taking the time to talk with me. Thanks so much. It's been great.